Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. And I'd like to thank PromptWorks for offering me the opportunity to give a talk. And I hope you all get something out of this, even if you got the slightest amount compared with what I got out of preparing for it. So this is Senior Dev Day, so everybody in the room is a senior in the field of some sort, a leader, maybe a senior developer. At least you've been around for a while. So how did you get here other than by getting old? So it's not pure technical skill that separates you from the younger colleagues, you know that. You know, a senior developer isn't somebody who can write a sorting algorithm faster. What sets you apart is your ability to look at a problem and say, I've seen this before, and I know what our options are. I know what questions to ask. I know who to ask, and I know what might bite us in the rear. And I know what I don't know, and I'm not afraid to admit it. So these are what we often call soft skills. Communication skills, critical thinking, pragmatism, accountability. There are a lot of them. These are the skills that make good leaders. So if we're honest, we admit that every job in every industry requires these skills at any level above mindless automaton. In every industry, career progression depends in a large part on increasing mastery of these skills. Yet in our industry in particular, we're continually either debating their value or raising awareness of their value as if it's a new idea. So recently, I found myself trying to explain the concept of soft skills to a friend in another field. She wasn't getting it, and finally she said, "Oh, I get it. In my industry, we call those skills." So meanwhile, we see in a lot of workplaces, and we read about in the news even, general acceptance of poor non-technical skills from developers, and even bad behavior in developers who are perceived to have a relatively high level of technical skill. It's like they're such good coders that they can get away with anything else. They're shielded from client contact. They're forgiven for bad communication. Has anybody seen that in places, of course, that they don't work now, but in places they may have worked in the past? Okay, so it's not entirely in the imagination. So that used to be me. Not because I was so great technically. I mean, I was fine. But I was the only one in the shop who was writing code. I was given an amazing amount of freedom. And I used that freedom to write more code. Because writing code feels great. It's why we're doing it, right? So in preparation for this talk, I read countless articles recommending that technical leaders master the kinds of basic interpersonal skills that my kids learned in kindergarten. For instance, I watched a video of a talk where the speaker shared this little bit of wisdom. Ready for it? It's good to say thank you when people do things for you. Okay. For whom is this new information? All right. The perceived need for articles like this exposes a pervasive myth that it's our level of technical skill that determines our value as developers. If we didn't have this myth, there would be no need to refute it. And by refuting it so clumsily while behaving so badly, we expose our ambivalence. And so what I'd mostly like to talk about today is our ambivalence toward what we've been calling soft skills. How our ambivalence toward them manifests itself, where it comes from, and what we might do to resolve it. Even the phrase soft skills reveals our ambivalence. And in order to talk about soft skills, I would like to just set the mood a little bit, if I may. No. No. It's playing an ad instead of what I want to play. Come on. All right. Never mind that then. We'll set the mood visually. We'll look at some soft things. Here we go. Soft things are comforting to touch, they're gentle to the ears, and they're easy to eat. The word soft implies weakness, and hard implies strength. It's as though we were saying it's really important to develop weakness. Weakness will make you strong. These skills are really hard to learn, and they're uncomfortable to use, and they're critical to our success. But we use a word that implies ease, comfort, and weakness. You know, you never want somebody to tell you that you've gone soft in the head. Not so much. And how does it feel for men? This word is notoriously problematic for men. How can we be surprised that talking about soft skills would make men want to cover their ears and scream? So, sorry about that. So, it seems, okay, maybe that was a bad idea. Anyway. So, we may as well encourage people to call them, to develop their warm, fuzzy, girly skills and see how well they want to jump right on board. So, I'm wondering if we could call them something else. What if we called them what they are, which is leadership skills? So for the rest of the session, I'm going to call them leadership skills, or non-technical skills, which is also a little more accurate. So before we go back to why we're so ambivalent about them, let's remind ourselves why we shouldn't be. What's so great about mastering non-technical skills? Leadership skills give us control over our work. Remember how great it is to be shielded from client contact? If we're not talking to the client, we're not there when decisions get made. We were just learning about this in the previous session. We've lost control over the work. Having communication skills means getting a seat at the table. The ability to see the big picture lets us have a say in how our work gets done. So remember how I mentioned the old me who got to write code all day? So we weren't actually making any money. They'd take my estimates to the client, cut them in half, and bring them back. And then our scope wasn't creeping, it was racing. I let people who didn't understand what we were doing run the show. Leadership skills give us career progression. As you get older and more experienced, you want and deserve a higher salary, don't you? How high can it get when you're only developing your technical skills? Do you get 50% more money than the younger kid because you can write 50% faster? Does the business understand that you're writing 50% better? It's not that easy to convince them of that. So how long does it last? At one point do you start saying, I'm smarter than my boss. I want to make decisions too. What am I still doing here? And what you're still doing is writing code. And what gets you promoted is leadership. So leadership also gives us better teams. Better leaders recruit better developers and keep them longer. Good leadership nurtures a positive culture, gives the team opportunities to learn and grow, and shields the team from unnecessary stress. These are the teams that attract and keep the best people. And who do we want those leaders to be? Should they be experienced developers or someone else? And if it's not experienced developers, then who should it be? Finally, come on, man. It's stuck. Oh, it's stuck. I lost it. I lost my thing. This is what you call a client computer. So finally, non-technical skills gain us consideration as people. As long as all we do is write code, the business people are going to see us as interchangeable. They think, let's get it done twice as fast by hiring twice as many people. They think, let's get really young, low-paid hourly contractors, burn them out, and then get more. They think, let's lay off everybody and outsource the work to a country with a depressed economy and lax labor laws. So what is the problem then? Why are so many of us struggling with these skills? And why are so many of us pretending that they don't matter? When I first started thinking about this, I thought maybe we reject non-technical skills because we're nerds. We're notorious for having no social skills when we're in charge of the industry. So we're going to construct a space where, for once, the skills we have, the technical skills, are the valued skills. So part of me thought this, and then another part of me thought it was a crackpot theory that was based on a stereotype. So I did what a good nerd should do and read, and I found out that my crackpot theory wasn't entirely wrong, but it's mostly not right either. For one thing, the idea that nerds don't have social skills just plain isn't true. Sure, we're not socially successful in a mainstream sort of way. Like in college, we may not necessarily have been the ones with the sports scholarships or rushing at the stylish sororities. We were probably more likely to be hanging out in the computer center or having all-night board game parties. But were we less social? We really weren't. I said all-night board game parties. So if you think about it, when I was talking earlier about the general acceptance, the tolerance of poor non-technical skills and bad behavior in those perceived to be the hot coders, that deserves a little scrutiny as well. Sometimes the big shots get their reputation by, not by being great developers, but by intimidating their colleagues into thinking that it's their colleagues' fault that they can't understand their own genius. Through subtle bullying, they protect themselves from exposing weaknesses in their technical skills. And that is manipulation, and the ability to manipulate actually is a non-technical skill. So how about these companies that use extreme interviewing techniques to try to find the most skilled candidates? Have you heard about these? You know, these very extreme sort of long puzzle-type interviews. So they're asking technical questions, but they're actually testing for non-technical skills. They're testing for abilities like the ability to work for long periods without food, or the ability to pretend to know things that they don't know, the ability to hold up under extreme pressure, which can be said to be a valuable skill, but only if we tolerate a certain kind of workplace that requires it. So it's not so much, it seems to me, it's not so much that we're bad at non-technical skills. It seems like we just value some more than others. So if that's the case, then why? Why would we do that? And I think that it comes from our culture, which comes from the history of our discipline. So during World War II, a ballistics computer wasn't a machine, it was a person. A computer was a person who computed. And as more women entered the workforce to replace men drafted into combat, a lot of them gained entry into male-dominated industries. And in one case, it was ballistics computing. But there was a sharp distinction between engineering on the one hand and computing on the other. One, engineering, high-paying and male, and the other, computing, low-paying and female. It took a lot of mathematical skill and more to be what they called a girl computer. But in spite of that, it was still considered the more clerical job. The first electronic computer in America was ENIAC, and it was developed to replace close to 200 girl computers. 6 of the women were selected to learn how to program the ENIAC. So I read, computing was a female job, and other female clerical workers operated business machines, so it was not unusual that in July 1945, women would migrate to a similar but new occupation. So though engineers originally conceived of programming as clerical, it was quickly proved to be a lot more complex. The 6 ENIAC operators had to understand both the mathematics and the machine itself. So first, women were hired to do this work because it was considered to be clerical. But later, it was considered to be clerical because women were doing the work. Throughout the 50s, computer programming as a discipline continued to be gendered female, even while the people actually doing the job were increasingly male. And then later, as computers began to be mass-produced, with them came a new appreciation for the complexity of programming software. In those days, it was all custom. And there was a very much higher demand for programmers, and the salaries began to rise. In the mid-60s, there was an estimate that there were 100,000 programmers in the US. There was an immediate need for 500,000 more. The higher status and the higher pay attracted more men to the occupation. So I'm going to read something that I read because it really puts it better than anything that I could say. For these aspiring male programming professionals, the lingering association of computer programming with the feminized activities of coding, corporate data processing, and other forms of clerical work was a source of perpetual career anxiety. One strategy for dealing with this occupational insecurity was to emphasize the degree of skill required to be a successful programmer. If the problem with programming, at least from an occupational status perspective, was that it was considered to be straightforward and mechanical, then the solution was to reframe the occupation as being active, creative, and unpredictable. So that sort of takes me back to that first job that I had when I was coding by myself and nobody knew what I was doing. My boss didn't know what I did. He didn't know how well I did it. I could get away with anything. I had power and freedom. I was a sorcerer. One pervasive myth that we have as developers is the myth of programmer as sorcerer. You know, this esoteric, ununderstandable glimmer of something that makes up our talent. This myth stemmed from early programmers' occupational anxiety as the reputation of our discipline changed from being mechanical and clerical to creative and complex. We defend our professional authority by characterizing ourselves as outside the understanding of normal people. So how does that affect our skills and our behavior? To practice mainstream leadership skills, sharing our knowledge, helping people, asking questions, accepting feedback, maintaining standards, threatens the professional authority that comes from our individual innate genius. The myth shows up in very small stories, like the one about my old job, and big stories, like the ones about those unpredictable, crazy geniuses who quit school and start tech companies in their garages. It also affects us because it created our culture. Our discipline carries the baggage of 2 seemingly contradictory stereotypes: the nerd and the bro. In a nutshell, the nerd seeks to recreate in our workplaces the culture of the college computer center. The bro seeks to recreate the culture of the college fraternity house. These are stereotypes, and we have good reason to be uncomfortable when we're talking out loud about stereotypes. But unlike the racial and ethnic stereotypes that we're way too familiar with, these aren't stereotypes that overprivileged people assign to underprivileged people to perpetuate their lack of privilege. These are stereotypes that we created ourselves to perpetuate our own privilege. So back to the old days again, the industry has a critical shortage of programmers. There was an understanding of programming as creative and complex work requiring innate genius. We didn't have the kinds of channels that we have now that would create this sort of talent. We didn't have code camps. We didn't even really have, computer science departments were coming into being, but they were not in the business of creating corporate computer programmers. So how would employers satisfy the increasing demand for these wizards? How do you identify who they are? They'd have to hire them from other disciplines and train them. But if a good programmer is born and not made, how do they identify who has that special glimmer, that innate talent? So they used social science. They looked at the good programmers that they had and identified common traits, developed psychometric and aptitude tests to discern these traits, and hired the people that did well on the tests. They looked for people that liked math puzzles and preferred to work more with machines than with people. So back in the 50s and 60s, people who would self-select these traits were much more likely to be white men than any other demographic group. It's not really a coincidence that the people the tests identified would be the people whose participation in any field is tied to the highest income and status. In other words, the attempts by our fathers and grandfathers to assign to our discipline the highest status created the culture that's still with us today. This helps us understand why we continue to reward or at least tolerate certain negative non-technical skills and discount the positive ones. We're favoring the skills that exclude over the ones that include. It may have been a rational reaction to the economy of the time. Today, it is not anymore. So what can we do today? I think that we should consider, rather than sort of talking about these skills as if they stand alone, we should consider a cultural shift that examines our habits and identifies which ones bring us forward into where we want our industry to be and which ones are relics of where our industry used to be. That would mean visualizing what we want our industry to be like, which I think that most of the people in this room have already been doing that and have already brought us forward from this kind of stereotype and this kind of behavior. There are still so many places where it just keeps going and going and going. So my own vision is fairly blurry, and it's clouded by my experiences in different, mostly large enterprise organizations. So my vision has a little bit too much not this of what I was just explaining. But I'd like to start a conversation that might start with just taking a stab at it. I'd like to see us more diverse. And I'm not just talking about bringing more women in tech. I think that there's a lot of attention being paid to that. I think that that's really valid. We also need to talk about race, sex, age, religion, identity, neurotype, body shape, you name it. I would like to see our demographics reflect the demographics of the educated population. I'd like us to become not mysterious and special, but a discipline of people. I think that we've, as professionals, been in high demand long enough that we can afford to do this. And even if we couldn't, I don't think that we have a right not to. Also, speaking to some of the things that we were already talking about earlier today, it would be nice, I would like to see us have a more collaborative, transparent relationship with other people we work with, such as business and user experience professionals. As we've heard all day, a lot of us have made tons of progress in this area already, but at the same time, there are still places left where we're playing out the same old trope between Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock, or Scotty. But how do these things, like a cultural shift, relate to the mastery of non-technical skills? If we consider non-technical skills to be leadership skills, then we understand that it takes leadership to change culture. We need to examine our own behavior and our own habits and ask ourselves which are good leadership and which are old habits. One way is to examine some of our hiring practices, such as hazing-style interviews. I don't think that the people who do this do it because they want to exclude good people from their teams. In fact, they really want more diversity and they want more people. I think that they mean well, but they don't realize what they're doing. It's an old habit. I think also on the topic of hiring, we should re-examine our idea of cultural fit. I think that a lot of times when we talk about cultural fit, instead of talking about whether this person fits with our vision for what we want to be doing for the world, we're talking about whether we would like to have a beer with this person. When we include somebody who may have any kind of difference into a team that's homogeneous, which happens to almost every team because our teams are still so homogeneous, what do we do to accommodate the person? What do we expect them to do? Do we expect people who are different to fit in? I feel that we should make as many accommodations as we can before the people come. We should make a space that's safe for all sorts of different kinds of people. Hopefully, if we build it, they will come. So, my last point, I want to reiterate that non-technical skills or soft skills are leadership skills, and that everybody on the team, regardless of level, should be considered a leader or an aspiring leader of one kind or another. And finding out what kind of leaders we are or want to be can help focus the development of our non-technical skill set. So rather than just saying everybody should be a good writer, or everybody should be a better speaker, or everybody should have more empathy, let's think about what goals each person have. What could each person bring to the team, and what skills do they need to focus on to achieve those goals? We're used to the idea that different people have different technical skills based on their interests and their aptitude, and that they grow and learn toward goals that have to do with those skills. Rather than treat non-technical skills as icing on the cake, we should provide resources toward achieving leadership skill goals and hold ourselves and our team members accountable to them. So those are just a few of my own ideas. I'm hoping that talking about this will convince you to have better ideas and do them, so that we can take control of both our discipline and our discipline's reputation and earn our salaries and our status based on the real value that we bring to the world and not on smoke and mirrors. So, thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Helene. Now I invite